Hi, I'm Bob Wormsley, and this is our part 2 of the Creating a Realistic Ocean Effect in Cinema 4D using the free plugin HOT4d. So this is where we left off from tutorial 1, and it's our render, and it's looking pretty good. What we're going to do in part 2 is we're going to include some foam maps to this render to make it look more realistic. So this is the look. And as you can see, this suddenly makes this ocean feel all that more realistic and much more detailed with the inclusion of some foam. So you need Cinema 4D and you need the free plugin HOT4d. The next part after this is to include some ocean spray, and we'll use some thinking particles to do that. But before that, we need to get the foam sorted out. So let's jump into Cinema 4D and get cracking. So here we are in our Cinema 4D file for our ocean, and this is where we got to at the end of tutorial 1. So if you've not got to this point, go back to tutorial 1, go through it, save your scene file, and this is where we'll be. So we've got a very nice ocean with some nice animation, and we've got some nice kind of highlights and reflective hits, but what we don't have is foam and we don't have spray, and that's what we're going to do now. So where we're going to access the controls to do this is within HOT4d, our free plugin, which is a deformer. And these are the controls down here that will enable us to make our foam and our spray. So we're going to do the foam first. And before we move into these settings, I'm going to make a lower resolution copy of our ocean. And I'm going to do that for this reason. If I press play now, the viewport is struggling to keep up with the animation of our plane. It can't even display the polygons. We're just getting this bounding box. And that is because if I come out of the scene camera, and if I, in our display, select the lines, we can see if I dolly in that we've got a really fine mesh with, thousands and thousands of polygons, and so there's millions of calculations being made every frame, which is why it can't play through it for us. It's too dense. And we want some really good feedback in our viewport in order to get the feel of the foam right. And for that reason, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a low poly replica which we're going to use to make our foam. So the way I'm going to do that is let's control drag our HOT4d down. So we've got a copy, and then we're going to make this one invisible, and we'll switch off the HOT4d. So this isn't making any calculations now. And now we've got our new one. So we want to bring in a lower poly plane. So we'll go to the object list and we'll pick plane. Now our high res plane was 500 by 500 segments. So let's make this one 200. So it's much less dense. And we'll bring that down and let's drop our HOT4d into it. So now we have got our lower poly version. And we could actually rename it, couldn't we? So let's rename this one and let's call it high res C, and we'll call this new one, let's call that low res C. Okay, good. And now let's go back into our scene camera. Now if I press play, we're getting some feedback, and this is going to be really important to us. So we'll just take these lines off, and let's make the physical sky invisible because you don't need to see that either. Here we go. So this is looking good. I'm just going to get rid of this axis as well because I don't need to be looking at this and it's putting me off a bit. So let's go to filter, and we're going to take the axis off, and I'm also going to take the let's take the grid off. I don't need to see that grid. Good. And yeah, no, that'll do us for now. That's fine. Okay. So now we've got our scene, we're getting some feedback, which is great. So what we need to do now is we need to add a couple of things to HOT4d. The first thing we need to do is check do Jacobian, which is basically going to switch on the ability to use all of these functions down here. Now what we need first to create a foam map is we need a blank vertex map to put into here. So how do we do that? Well, we click on the plane, and we need to make the plane editable. It needs to be polygons. So we'll press C, which makes it editable. And now we'll go to point mode, and we'll go to select, set vertex weight, and just leave it default. Okay. So now we have a vertex map on the plane, and it's just all red, which means that there's no weight at all. Yellow means 100% weight, red means no weight, and it fades in between the two. All right, good. And let's rename that. From the default vertex map, we're going to call this Jacob. And we'll drag that into our J- map. All right, let's back it up and press play. And now our vertex map has this interesting pattern on it. Now what this pattern is, it is the fractal noise that we used to adjust the deformation of this plane has now been used to paint what is become an animated vertex map, which is very, very cool. And if I just go back into point mode, which will flatten the deformation, let's go to poly mode, and here is our animated vertex map. Now this is the fractal that we were adjusting with all of these different HOT4d settings. All they were doing were adjusting how this fractal was moving. And now we have it as a vertex map. Okay, so that's the first thing that we needed to have done. Now what we also need to do is we need to produce a second vertex map, which is going to be used as our foam threshold. Now this will all make sense in a bit. I know it's a bit confusing at first. So we need to make another vertex map. So let's go into point mode, select the plane, and we're going to go to select, vertex weight, and now we've got another one, and this is just a blank vertex map. I'll go back to object mode. We've made another one, and this one we're going to call foam. Now it's really important to rename your vertex maps using HOT4d. So I've called one Jacob and one called foam. You can call them whatever you like, but call them something that's different from the default name in there, and something different. So I've got Jacob and foam, and if you don't do that later in the tutorial, this technique will not work for you. So this is a really important stage to do it. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my foam vertex map and put it in the foam map section here. Okay, and I'm going to keep my foam one highlighted, and we'll press play. So now, by doing nothing, we suddenly have an animated vertex map that's looking like foam being created from the peaks and fading off. Now, the way in which we control this and give ourselves different looks are with two sliders, the Jacob threshold and the foam threshold. And they work like this. The lower the Jacob threshold, the more of the fractal is creating foam. If I boost this up, it's only the very peaks that are creating foam. If I move it further up, it becomes even just the highest points of the fractal are creating this foam. If I reduce it, much lower areas, it's being produced from most of the spots. So that's what the Jacob threshold does. It says how much foam is going to be activated. Further up, it's only the very highest points of the fractal, so there's much less foam. We bring it down, and much lower points of the fractal. So let's just point up there for now. So that's the first slider. The second slider, the foam threshold, is how quickly that foam dissipates once it's been created. And if I move it this way, it dissipates more quickly. So it's being created, but it's dissolving immediately. and it's disappearing very, very, very quickly. If I bring it down, it's remaining on the surface and it's dissipating and dissolving more slowly to the point where it's staying on the surface for a long, long time and gradually fading away. So that's what the two controllers do. And what we are going to do is we are going to actually produce two different renders which we will layer on top of each other in After Effects. The first one is going to be a layer that is going to have a very fast fade on the foam. So something like this, where the foam's being created and it's disappearing quite quickly, but it's giving a really nice sense of movement. That's going to be the first one. And then the second one, we're going to have much less foam, so just being generated from the highest spots, but we're going to get it to hang around for much longer. So you see how it's floating on the surface now, these spots of foam. And we're going to use those two different foam maps in our render, and this is going to give us a really good look. So let's put it back to the first render. So the first render, we want it to dissipate more quickly to give a real sense of movement. Maybe have a little bit more. So you will do a bit of pushing and pulling on these two functions till you get your head around it. But once you do, it actually gives you a huge amount of control. So I think there's a little bit too much. Let's reduce that. That's looking a bit nicer. I think I could fade out fractionally quicker. No, go back. Slightly more. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So that's how I want my foam to look. So I can press stop. So how do we, if I render this, obviously nothing renders. So what we need to do is use this vertex map within a texture to make our foam. So the way we're going to do that is we're not going to be rendering any alpha channels or doing anything flash here. All we're going to do is render a black and white image. And on the black and white image, I want anywhere where there's foam to be white and anywhere where there isn't foam to be black. And then we're going to just screen it over our ocean comp in After Effects. So let's make a material. We'll double click on the material to bring up the material settings. And what we're going to do is make our foam, and we're going to use a luminance channel for this because we want a grayscale image, and we're going to screen this or add this over our comp in After Effects. So we don't need any shadows or anything like that. So we're going to hit luminance, and we're going to put this luminance channel on our plane. At the moment it's affecting the entire plane, which isn't what we want. What we want is to mask out this luminance channel so it only appears where the yellow parts of our vertex map are. So the way we're going to do that is there is an effect, and we're going to go to texture, and we'll go to effects and vertex map and click on this, and here's our vertex map effect. If I click in here, we get the settings, and there is a drop box where we can put our vertex map. So let's drop that in there. So now what we can do, if I render, now wherever it is yellow on our vertex map, we're getting that luminance masked out. All right, so we're getting somewhere. So what we need is a bit of texture in there, because at the moment it's just very milky and very smooth, and this isn't going to work for our foam texture. So at this point, if you had a really good image of some ocean foam, a really kind of high-res photo, that would work quite well in this instance. But I don't, so I'm just going to make a procedural texture with some noise. So the way I'm going to do that, I need to be able to layer some noise on top of this map. So we're going to change it to a layer. And a layer will turn it into a bit like Photoshop, really. We can click in here. It's automatically inserted our vertex map, and now we can layer more shaders on top of this. So I'm going to use several noises. So I'm going to put another layer inside it, and in this layer, this is where all our noises are going to live. So we're going to hit shader, noise, and the first one I want a noise with some dark black separated lines in. So dense is a good one, or let's go with hammer, which is a bit of a kind of a Voronoi look. All right, so that looks good. Just going to lighten this up a bit. Yeah. And let's just leave it at that for now. Okay. So now if I hit render, it's covering absolutely everything in our scene. And that's because it's knocked out our vertex map. This is just this layer here on normal is taking over everything, and there's no blend mode, so this vertex map isn't doing anything at the moment. But this is the clever bit. What we can do is we can use this vertex map a little bit like a track matte in After Effects. So if I go to the blend mode, and if I move down to the layer mask option and hit render, now it's working, and this is revealing my foam pattern. Now at the moment, I quite like the way in which the black lines are breaking this up, but it's looking a little bit too much like cobbled paving, so we need to blend it in a little bit more. So we're going to add another noise, and I'm going to add I think I'll just go with a normal noise at the moment, and we'll make it much smaller. Let's make it quite speckly. Bring it down to 10. I'm just going to crush it a bit. Let's have a look. Yeah, that looks okay. And then what I'm going to do, I'll tell you what, I'll bring up my interactive render region so we can see this update as it's happening. So at the moment, it's no longer looking at this one because this is set to normal mode. So it's just this speckly noise that's been applied. But if I screen it over the top and then bring down the power of that till we get some of our lines back, yeah, that's looking quite nice. Okay, I like that. So now what I want to do is, let's just move this along a bit. Yeah, so I just want to add a little bit more kind of speckliness to this. So I'm going to add another noise. And this one, I'm going to go with one that's got a lot of detail. Let me just move that for you. Let's try a FBM, which is this really kind of fluffy one. So I'm going to get my FBM, and again, I'm going to really crush this down to that kind of look, and maybe reduce the brightness a bit. Let's have a look. Okay, and I'm going to multiply this one on top. All right, so that's kind of knocked some of that out a little bit. Let's bring that down a bit. All right, and you do a little bit of pushing and pulling until you get a look that you're happy with. Okay, I think that's going to work for me on this one. Now you can spend as much as you like on this, and you can be forever creating noises and getting different patterns and trying different blend modes and all kinds of different tricks, and you can waste days of your life. I'm going to stick with this. That's going to do. All right, good. Let's just get rid of interactive render region. All right, so we're almost ready to do our render of our first foam pass. And I'm happy with it, happy how it's looking. But there's one thing we need to do to make this look right. And if you remember, we made a low-res C, but what we didn't do is we didn't do a pin texture tag on our new C. And if we don't put that pin texture tag on, this noise isn't going to stick to the surface of this plane. It's going to look like the plane is floating through the noise, and it's going to look flickery and horrible. So let's go back to frame 1. We'll go to select our low-res C and go to tags, Cinema 4D tags, stick texture, and hit record. And we'll play again. Render, and now it will stick, and now it'll work okay. Great, so now we're ready to do a render on this. So we'll go to our render settings, and we're going to output all frames 0 to 25. We're going to save, and let's save a file location, and I'm going to go for obviously you put it in your folder, but Ocean Tutorials, Tutorial 2, render files, I will stick it in there, and I'm going to call it Ocean 2 Foam 1. Great. That'll do. We don't need an alpha channel because we're going to be screening this over the top anyway, so we'll just render it black and white. Anti-aliasing, I'm going to stick it on best. Make sure it's on gauze for an animation, which will smooth out the anti-aliasing. And we've got our camera scene selected. Right, so we're ready for business. So we'll hit render. And there it goes, rendering away. So I'll pause the tutorial here, and then I'll come back when it's finished rendering, and I'll tell you how long it took. Okay, so that was a pretty quick sim, really. It took 3 minutes and 6 seconds to render, and we have our first foam pass, and that's what it looks like. So let's jump back into the viewport. So now what we want to do is we're going to do our second foam pass. Now this one is going to be slightly different. This one, what I want to do is I want to achieve, I want to have less foam being emitted, so right only on the very peaks, but I want the foam to last for a lot longer. So I'll bring this slider up to create less foam, so it's just emitting from the peaks, and then this slider is the foam threshold is how long that foam is going to hang around for. So let's have a look. So you can see it's staying on and it's animating off and then gradually going. All right, so let's just stop that there and have a render. It's perhaps a little bit too much, to be honest, so let's bring this up even more. I just want little spots of it, really, perhaps even a bit more. Let's go again. Yeah. And maybe even less of it. Yes, that's better. So these little spots that stay on the sea are just going to give a little bit more of an extra dimension to it. So let's just give those a render there, and let's not mess about. So render settings, let's save this one as foam 2. That's it. Same options for everything else, same anti-aliasing obviously. Great. So we'll give that one a render as well. So let's render it to the picture viewer. There it goes. And I'll come back to you at the end of this when it's finished. And we'll jump into After Effects once this is done. And here we are back in After Effects. So this is our comp from tutorial 1, and this is what we rendered. So we've got our ocean, and we have got our background layer, which is our gradient. We've got this sun layer, which is just giving this fake bit of volumetric sunlight. And then we've got 3 ocean layers. The bottom one is our base ocean. So let's just rename that now so we're organized. So let's call this ocean base. Then we have got this layer, which is our glints without the sun rays. So let's just call this glints. And then the layer on top of that is our glints, which have been blurred out to give us these fake kind of sun rays. So let's call that glints rays. All right, so that's nice and organized. So what we're going to do now is layer up our 2 foam maps on top of what we have already got. So let's just turn off the sunlight and the background and the 2 glints. So we've just got our base ocean. That's all we really need for this comping process. So what we need to do, obviously, is bring in our 2 clip sequences of our foam. So we'll double click in here. And what I'm looking for is my ocean tuts, and I've got my renders here. So foam 1, import that, and then I need, in there I've got foam 2. So here are my 2 foam sequences. So I'm going to bring in foam 1 first and put that, going to put that underneath the glints. So there it goes. And if I scrub it along, there's my foam texture. All right. So this is a black and white image, and we don't have any alpha transparency information here. I didn't render an alpha channel. That's not what we were doing. So what we're going to do, we're just merely going to screen this on our ocean, and straight away we suddenly have foam, which is excellent. Now, because I rendered this using our low poly ocean, and the ocean texture size was small, just because I wanted to get it out quickly, you can see that it looks fine, but it's a little bit blurry, and there's not a huge amount of detail in this. So for this instance and for this comp, we're going to fake a bit of detail, just to make it look a little bit more interesting. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to use a couple of effects. So I'll bring up my effects controls, and we're going to go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, and we're going to sharpen it just a bit. Now, if I increase this sharpener slightly, you'll see we'll get much harder lines on our foam. So that's brought that in. Don't go too mad, otherwise you're going to get flickering. All right, that looks good. And then I'm going to add another effect. And I think I'm just going to add an exposure effect, so color correction exposure. And I'm just going to bring this exposure up slightly to make it a little bit more prominent. It's brightening up that foam. All right, so I'll just solo it so we can see what's happening. So this is without the exposure. I'm just brightening it up a wee bit. Maybe not that much, just a bit. All right, so now we have our foam layer, our first foam layer, which is looking good. Excellent. So now let's go back to project. So let's bring in our foam layer 2, and I'm going to put this one on top. Now this foam layer was the foam that kind of lingered around for much longer. Let's just solo it. So it was released by the ocean, and then it kind of stays on the surface and fades out very slowly. I really like this one. So again, I'm going to add the sharpen effect, because it's such low res. We'll try and cheat a bit more detail with it. All right, good. And I'll also bring in a color correction exposure, and just bring it up ever so slightly. Okay, good. So then we're going to select this one onto screen blend mode as well. Unsolo it. And now we've got our 2 foams, one of which fades out and dissipates quite quickly, but gives these really nice outlines of the peaks of our waves. And the other one stays on the water for longer. Look, I mean, let's just follow one of the journey of one of them. So here is a little bit of a foam pattern from our second foam map. And as we click by, look, it's still moving up the wave. It's moving up, and then it's engulfed by the next wave. That's what we want. Excellent. So that's looking good. So let's include the rest of our layers. So we'll bring the background back in. We'll bring our glints back in on the top, and then we'll bring in our fake sun. And now we're talking. We've got an ocean with some nice foam maps, and it's all working together well, and it's starting to look much, much more realistic. So what we'll do, I'll render this one out, and then I'll come back to you when we've got the final render of the foam map added, and we can compare what it looks like to the original. So here we have our render from tutorial 1, and this has got our glints and our rays, but this doesn't have any foam, but this one is looking good. And now here is our second render. So this has our 2 foam maps applied to it. and you can see that it really brings it to life. We've got our first foam map, which is giving us these nice veiny lines and fading out quickly, and our second one, which is staying on the surface. So in tutorial 3, we'll be bringing in some spray, and here it is. So we'll be adding the spray elements to the top of our peaks, and this is really the finishing touch. This is what's going to make it look fantastic. So we will include that into tutorial 3. So if you subscribe to me now, that'd be fantastic. If you could like the video, that would help me out a lot. And as soon as tutorial 3 is ready, it'll be uploaded and you'll get a message. So until then, cheers.